All right, chapter 5. I hope you're ready. We're going into the systemic care. So, creating systemic vitality. And as I mentioned in the previous chapters, um, when it comes to systemic care, we are hitting the bullseye on the wrong target. So, this chapter is about uh, aiming at a different target to really create systemic vitality. And so, this chapter starts with going over um, the 5 keys to systemic vitality. And so I had recently had somebody ask me about, well, what is systemic vitality? What is vitality? And I gave you that definition at the beginning, but one thing that occurred to me was vitality is like a vibrant ecosystem, right? It's like when everything in the environment is working together, supporting each other part of the ecosystem to work in the most optimal way. It's a very coherent, very supportive, very interdependent, very symbiotic relationship. Everybody's working together to create a vibrant ecosystem. And so this is obviously just a beautiful picture of a vibrant ecosystem. Unfortunately, these things are not as easy to find in the world, but not going to go down that rabbit hole. But we can at least do our best to create this vibrant ecosystem within us systemically. Okay, and so I talked about 5 key things that are going to help you create a vibrant ecosystem inside of you. And the first one is sleep. And I'm going to talk about all of these here in a second. We got sleep, number 1, getting outside, the sun. We're going to talk about the sun and getting in the good breath we go over in this chapter. Obviously, nutrition, huge topic in chapter 5. And then obviously mindset and movement. And so mindset and movement are obviously huge parts of this whole book, right? Like we have a whole chapter on movement. You guys just finished them, 3 and 4. And then mindset's coming next. So the 3 things we're going to focus on in chapter 5 is we're going to talk about sleep, we're going to talk about getting outside, and then we're going to get into nutrition. All right. Those are the 3 focuses: how to optimize sleep, getting outside, and nutrition to help create this vibrant ecosystem. So let's start with sleep. Key takeaways for sleep. All right. This is probably the most important thing. There's no substitute. So there's nothing you can do to substitute for not getting enough sleep. You can eat perfectly. You can move perfectly. You can meditate till the cows come home. It's not going to matter. There's no substitute for sleep. And that's, as I mentioned, you want to really get some clarity and knowledge about how important sleep is. Read Matthew Walker's book. I mentioned it in my book in this chapter, Why We Sleep. There's no substitute. Okay, so just really remember that you can't make up for not sleeping by supplementing, by drinking more coffee, or other hacks. Okay, and I spoke about hacks in a couple videos ago. Like, just stop hacking your sleep. Like, just get sleep. And so my general recommendation is no less than 6 hours. If I have a client that I'm working with and I find out that they're not getting close to 6 hours on average, again, I'm not saying that you can never get it. I'm talking on average. They get 3 or 4 hours of sleep. There's like a lot of my focus and resources go to helping them get to sleep, because not sleeping creates all kinds of systemic issues, and mental and emotional issues and physical issues. So not sleeping, if you're having trouble sleeping and you're not getting at least 6 hours on a consistent basis, there's really nothing else in this book that would be more important than this next slide, which are things to help you get a good night's sleep, which actually I didn't write the next slide in the book, so it's a little bit of a bonus, right? So no less than 6, ideal 7 to 9. So anytime I work with somebody and I'm trying to help them organize their life and create some structure and calendaring and routines, the first thing I tell them to do is I ask them, okay, when are you going to bed? When are you waking up? So how are you getting your 7 to 9 hours? So we at least want to have a plan for that. Okay. We want to have a plan to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. Okay. That's going to put you in a place of optimal function. I'm not talking about surviving. Well, I can get away with sleeping 4 hours, Matt. It's fine. It's like, I'm not debating that. But when it comes to optimizing systemic and of having a vibrant ecosystem systemically, the research, it's unquestionable. 7 to 9 hours is what creates that. Okay. Now, I did also want to talk about resting the body versus sleeping, because if you're having trouble sleeping for 6 hours, 7 hours, it can be very frustrating. And so the thing I'll tell people is, okay, well, let's just focus on trying to rest the body for at least 6 hours a night. So maybe you're not sleeping for 6 or 7, 8 hours, but you're resting. And resting means lying down without being stimulated. It could be lying and doing some breath work, listening to some calming music, or something that just puts you into a parasympathetic state to put yourself into the recovery and regenerative mode. Okay, so if I can't sleep for 7 to 9 hours, then I'm going to focus on just resting my body through the night for 7 to 9 hours. And maybe if I'm resting, I commit to get in bed at 10 o'clock, lights out, no stimulation, no screens, and I'm going to stay in bed and rest till 6 in the morning. Okay, that's 8 hours. Okay, I'm committed to that, right? So that would be a place to start. One of the things I do for people is say, hey, just get into bed a half hour earlier than you are right now. That's a good place to start. Okay. And then, okay. So those are the big four pieces, key takeaways for sleep. And now I want to walk you through ways to support sleep and alertness. And this came, a lot of this came from Andrew Huberman's Lab podcast number 84. A lot of this, what I'm going to share with you came from Andrew Huberman's research. Phenomenal podcast if you haven't listened to him. So if you want to hear the whole thing and all the science that he goes into, Huberman Lab podcast number 84. This is a lot of these ideas come from that. Okay, so I'm going to take you through kind of the perfect scenario from as soon as you wake up to when you go to bed. And what's really interesting is what impacts your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep at night is actually what do you do when you first wake up, like what your morning routine looks like, etc. So I'm going to walk you kind of through the ideal scenario, and maybe you can pull things out that pull one or two things out and try them. So the first thing that's the most important, and this has made such a difference for me, and I mentioned this in the book, is when you wake up, as quickly as possible, try to get some morning sunlight. Like, get outside as quickly as possible, and try to get outside within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. All right. This is a routine that I've been inside of and recommend to my clients. But I get out there and take the dog for a walk. As soon as I wake up, I take the dog for a walk if the lights are out. So I'd like to rise with the sun whenever I can. And when I'm home, I take the dog for a walk. So getting that sunlight 30, 60 minutes, within 36 minutes, literally sets your circadian rhythms. Again, Huberman goes through all the science of it, but essentially it kind of starts your clock. It starts your circadian rhythm clock and allows the body to kind of go through its natural rhythms, so that basically, I think it's 14 or 16 hours later, it's time for bed. So it kind of starts that clock, okay, to get that sunlight in your eyes, okay? When you wake up in the morning, getting some cold exposure or movement is an excellent way to kind of get the body going, right? And the purpose of cold exposure and movement is actually to heat up the core, right? It's to stimulate core. It's to increase your core temperature. And it's like, well, wait, Matt, I think Matt just misspoke because he said cold exposure. Yeah, the benefit of cold exposure is it forces the body to increase its core temperature. Okay. Movement obviously increases core temperature. So my routine is I get up, get outside, go for a walk outside with the dog. I go work out, and then I do a cold plunge. So my gym has a cold plunge. So I'll work out, sweat, and then I jump into the cold plunge. I actually do a steam first, and then I jump into the cold plunge for about 2 minutes. And boy, I'm ready to rock and roll, man. It is incredibly, it's an incredible activator of the system to get you ready to rock and roll. And a lot of research that Huberman talks about on dopamine and how cold exposure helps to increase dopamine and then sustains dopamine. And dopamine is the motivation molecule. We get into this in some of my courses, and definitely in future books. I will be writing a lot about this idea when I write my book on systemic health, systemic vitality, excuse me. All right. So cold exposure and movement's a great next step. And then this one is another great one that I've been trying my best to implement. Sometimes I fail, but don't have any caffeine. And for you want to be awake for 90 to 120 minutes. So once you wake up, wait 90 to 120 minutes before you take in caffeine. Again, that is because you want the normal rhythms and hormones and neurotransmitters that wake you up and get you going. You don't want to interfere with them too much, because caffeine is definitely, it's not a bad thing, but it's just, you want to authentically wake up and become motivated before putting in the enhancement. And so this has made a big difference for me in waking up and feeling authentically energized by doing these first two things first and waiting maybe 2 hours before having my first cup of coffee. Okay. Great little tip that has been super helpful for me. Also eating early in the day. Eating is basically a signal to the body that it's time to wake up. It's time to get going. It's time to start moving. So a lot of people and fasting, and I would say in general, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. I think it's one of those hacks that I would be more careful of doing than just doing. I don't think people are getting enough nutrients as it is. If you listen to to chapter 5 summary, chapter, whatever chapter it was, chapter 2, when I was kind of breaking down the big problem with systemic and nutrition, is we don't get enough calories. We're undernourished, and we don't have enough fuel. So usually fasting for people that aren't eating well and their systems are already stressed, I just don't recommend it blindly. I would be very cautious with that. Eat early in the day to get the body going. More often than not, working with clients, and I think Eve would definitely agree with this. We are always trying to get people to eat more, eat more, better food. It's very rare that we're saying, oh, you need to fast for 12. Like fasting, I would just say proceed with coffee. So eat early in the day definitely helps, again, to get the body going, motivated, ready to rock and roll. A midday reset. This can look a variety of ways. Midday reset, again, circadian rhythms. There is a time in the day where there's a little bit of a lull, and resetting could be taking a power nap, could be napping. It could be just going for a walk outside and doing some of that, the perfect breath that we're going to talk about here in a second. But just something to kind of get out and reset. I love getting outside. I live in Southern Florida, so I have the benefit of having beautiful weather almost always. So when I get outside, and this also comes from Huberman's recommendations, I don't think it's in this podcast, but finding a horizon, looking up in the sky, using your visual system to hit the reset button, right? Especially if we're working really hard and we're focused on something, that triggers the sympathetic system because it's focus. The stress response is on, which is super useful and effective, which we'll talk about in chapter 7. And it's great, but we also want to open up the aperture, look at the sky, open up the visual cue, because when we open up the visual cue, it opens the mind up, it opens the brain, it gets it to that 20,000 feet that I mentioned in chapter 8 about getting to 20,000 feet, reset. So that's one of the ways I do a reset. Doing a meditation is a good thing, a breathing practice, but doing a reset during the middle of the day, very, very helpful to sustaining energy, motivation, and also setting yourself up for a good night's sleep. Afternoon sunlight in the early evening. So again, that's kind of this reason why I go outside. Getting some sunlight in the early evening is also helpful, especially as we go into the dusk hours. And it's that not super high intense light that you're going to get in the morning, but afternoon sunlight in the early evening, always good thing to do. And then as you go into the night, you want to dim lights in the internal environment. And so dim lights basically means, if you can, in a perfect world, go from overhead lighting to more lamps. So lights that are more in this plane, right? More in the horizontally, like eye level, as opposed to overhead lights. Overhead lights are definitely more stimulating and kind of cueing the body that the sun's up, it's time to rock and roll. As the sun sets, the sun's now more, in our visual field, and so shifting to lamps as the nights go on. I love candles. It's like my new thing. I think I might be driving you crazy with it, because when we go into the bedroom, like I just want candles in the bedroom, and just really kind of dim light. I feel like it does wonders for my ability to sleep. And while I'm putting on all the candles, I do heat exposure. So it's the opposite that what you would do in the morning. So the last thing I do right before I go to bed is I take a hot shower, usually with candles in the bathroom. So I light a couple candles in the bathroom and I take a really hot shower. Okay, so heat exposure actually cools your core temperature, right? Okay, because if I'm heating the body, my body has to cool it down. And in order for you to fall asleep, your body has to drop a few degrees. If you got it, you actually have to drop your core temperature to fall asleep. Okay, so doing some heat exposure right before bedtime is a great way to position yourself to fall asleep. So candlelight, bath, shower, hot shower, awesome thing to do before you go to bed. And sleep environment cooler. Also very great. I think the last thing I saw was about 68 degrees is ideal. That can be very cold for people. I like it cold. So, there are also things you can get to put on your bed that cool your mattress. Lots of different things out there. But having a colder, cooler environment when you sleep, also very helpful. And so you'll notice that all of these things contribute to a better night's sleep. One other thing that I would say to be very mindful of, and it just depends, is caffeine intake, obviously later in the day. Probably not the best idea for sleeping. And screens and, watching TV right before you go to bed and all that blue light exposure. I mean, there's lots of things about that as well. But again, for another time. But here's just I thought this would be helpful for everybody. All right. So, want to talk about the next thing I mentioned in the book is getting fresh air, getting outside. So important, obviously, for getting outside is going to give you the fresh air. It's going to give you the sunlight. The most beneficial place to spend your time outside is around trees and or the ocean, around bodies of water, because of the ions and all of the benefits of being around trees and the ocean. Super beneficial when you're outside to be with nature. So when you go outside, if you can be around these things. And then when you're outside, being conscious of that perfect breath, which I mentioned, and that's James Nestor's perfect breath, which is about a 5 to 6 second inhale and a 5 to 6 second exhale. And the purpose, why it's the perfect breath, is because it optimizes. It's the perfect breath because it optimizes all the physiological benefits of breathing. Okay, oxygenating the system, etc. So when you go outside and you're hugging a tree or putting your feet in the ocean, just stop and do a couple of those 5 to 6 second inhales, 5 to 6 second exhales to really recharge and regenerate the body. Walking around in the grass in your bare feet, like these are the kinds of things that are just so helpful to supporting systemic vitality and that vibrant ecosystem. All right. There's also you'll see here as part of these resources that I provide you with the book. There's really great plants you can put in your house that are actually natural air filters. So there's a whole list of them in that document here. And I also list some of the best indoor air filters. So not only is it important to get outside to get fresh air, but it's also important to do what you can if you're indoors a lot to help increase the quality of the air when you're inside. All right. So that's getting outside, breath, and now we're going to go to the next piece, but this is where I have to warn you. Alert. Alert. Right? The alarms are going off. I'm about to talk about nutrition. Okay? And so, all joking aside, and this is why I put this in the book, I understand how sensitive this topic is. I understand that when we talk about food and what we should and shouldn't be eating, it's not really a conversation about food. I mean, it's a political, it's a cultural, it's a socioeconomic conversation. It's an environmental conversation. I mean, there's so many variables that come into this equation, and they're all super important to talk about, and they're all very valid and things that we need to focus on and we need to address. All right. That being said, when I'm recommending here with nutrition, I'm not talking about any of those things. Okay. That's not part of the conversation, right? My focus here when I went into a deep dive in nutrition was two key things. All right. So the foundation of the vitality principles of eating, I only asked two questions. I only wanted to know two things. And those two things were, how do we optimize energy production at the cellular level? And how do we optimize recovery, regeneration, growth, and development? Like, how does it happen? How do we do? What's the most optimal way? What foods create the most optimal way to get those two things done? Period. End of story. Everything else, I'm just going to put aside for now. And that's how we met, as you read in the book, Dodie Anderson and eventually Dr. Ray Peat. And much of the recommendations come from his research. And his research, and why I fell in love with him and his research, is all of his research and all of his work that he does is all based on these two things. So anytime there's a recommendation, he's making a recommendation, it's based on these two things. That's it. Okay. He's not, in bed with any companies. He has literally no agenda. He's just out there sharing his knowledge with people. And Eve, to this day, still very fortunate to engage with him. So I said it in the book. This is, when it comes to the science of what we're sharing, this is our main resource. Not the only one, but it's by far the main one. I can honestly tell you that anytime we have consulted with him and engaged with him, he's never steered us wrong, and we've always seen results, not only for ourselves, but our clients. So big shout out to Ray Peat here. But you can obviously go to his website, raypeat.com. He's got YouTube interviews that he does. There's podcasts that he does. And I did put in the book a bunch of resources that I would recommend. All right. And so let's start with measuring vitality, because I mentioned one of the downsides to the health model is how we measure health, blood tests. So we created the Vitality Big Six, which is when these six things are on point, we measure them and we use them as a feedback loop as to if what we're doing is helping. These are the things that we really emphasize. We want to know about someone's quality of sleep. We want to know their emotional stability. We want to know their mental acuity. We want to understand how digestion is happening or not happening. Are they going to the bathroom? Are they not? Energy levels and satiety. Are you hungry? Are you craving? Are you never hungry? Like, what's going on there? So these are the Vitality Big Six, and these are the things that we put up and emphasize as whether we are doing things that are conducive to vitality. Sure, blood work can fit into this equation, but this takes the precedence, okay? And obviously, there's a lot of variables that can influence this, especially emotional stability and mental acuity, which is why there's chapter 7. But when it comes to food definitely, without question, influences all these things. So we want to understand when we're making choices, when we're making decisions about how to take care of our systemic health and vitality, how are these things doing? These have to be on the radar, right? And this is what we use to measure. The other thing we look at is body temperature, okay? And optimal temps, morning around 98 to 98.2, and afternoon 98.6. this is one of the first things Dodie and Ray had us do with Eve, and Eve's case study was to track this and to track her temperatures. And based on how she was eating, one of the first things that they used to know if we were on track was how are her temperatures? Are they coming up? And they were, and it was pretty amazing, as you saw in that case study with Eve, that the results were phenomenal. And we've been reproducing them with people for years. This is really Eve's wheelhouse, but it's really fun to see her work with people and see how empowered they can be through some very simple concepts. All right, so we kind of got to the vitality paradigm, the macronutrient breakdown here. And so this is a very general idea of the breakdown of macronutrients. And I would say this is usually a place we'll start people. I would say very recently, we've been seeing more success. And as a matter of fact, we were listening to one of Ray's a podcast recently, and he's been talking about how he's seeing better results with actually a little bit more carbohydrates and less protein. So 50% carbohydrates is usually the least, and then 35 and 15. So again, this is very general. And obviously we're going to talk right now about different types of carbs, best kinds of proteins and fats. And so just a real quick overview here. The best source of carbohydrates are simple sugars. The best sources of proteins are animal proteins, and the best sources of fats are saturated fats. So we want the majority of carbs, protein, and fats to be simple sugars, animal proteins, and saturated fats. And you'll see right here, a general macronutrient breakdown in general is proteins kind of, we'll call it the anchor point. And I know that's usually one of the places Eve focuses when she works with people, is making sure they get enough protein. And so let's say, I'm just going to say 100 grams of protein. That would mean you'd want to get at least 150 grams of carbs and maybe 50 grams of fat. So you always want your fat grams to be less than your protein grams, which is less than your carbohydrate grams, which is essentially this equation. All right. Now, let's talk about carbohydrates. And I want to talk about sugar because, like I said in the book, sugar needs a new PR firm. Their public relations is terrible, and they're getting blamed for a lot of things. Sugar gets blamed for so many things that it has nothing to do with. So real sugar gets the job done. So let's really define what I mean by that. So let's talk about complex carbohydrates. Okay, so complex carbohydrates are our grains. That's, and even some vegetables. Tubers are complex carbohydrates. Right, so complex carbohydrates. Why are we saying complex carbohydrates aren't great, and why are we saying simple sugars are better? It really all comes down to blood sugar. As I said in the book, we want carbohydrates to deliver glucose to the cell in the most efficient way, and we want it to be sustainable. And so the thing about complex carbohydrates is it converts into pure glucose, like I mentioned in the book, which has the highest glycemic index value. So it's 100. So you're going to get a fast raised blood sugar, and it's going to continue. And that's the real key. It raises blood sugar and it continues to. So it may take a little bit longer because it takes a little bit to break down a complex carbohydrate. But once that pure glucose goes into the system, it raises at a continuous rate, right? Which can lead to large drops in blood sugar levels, okay? Because it just keeps going, it eventually falls off. And that's essentially this graph here. So it's just this kind of linear, straight up, and then boom, crashes. And there's a strong insulin response because of that continuous rise in blood sugar. And that leads to sluggish weight gain, fat storage, high stress, low energy, and irritability. This is what a lot of the articles that I referred in the book, Ray goes into great detail about this for sure. When it comes to simple sugars, it's a different story. Simple sugars, as I mentioned in the book, converts to glucose and fructose. So the glucose is high glycemic, fructose is low, 12. That's what makes up the molecule sucrose, which basically puts us at about 63. So we get a much more optimal level of delivery of glucose. It raises it much faster. You'll get there faster, but then it balances off. Okay, and that's where the some of those values that I showed you of glycemic index test blood sugar level, blood sugar levels 2 hours after, and then I showed you what it looks like 4 hours later. And so when you looked at some of the fruit, yes, it might be higher in the first 2 hours, but after 4 hours, it's actually lower than complex carbohydrates, and that's essentially because it's not as steep as a spike. I mean, it's a little steeper spike, but then it bounces off. Okay, and optimal blood sugar, mental clarity, calm energy, restful sleep, and just general happiness, right? Contentment, right? Because we have the energy. And so this is the big reason why we are recommending simple sugars. It's because it gets glucose to the cell in the most efficient way, period. Okay, now let's define what real sugar is, because like I said, sugar, this word sugar, is being thrown around out there, and I honestly don't even know what people mean by it anymore. So when we referred to sugar, we're referring to these things, foods with real sugar, okay? So we're going to define what real sugar is, not this idea of sugar that lives in the world, right? So foods with real sugar: fruits, dairy, tubers, honey, cane sugar, real maple syrup, okay? So when we say, if you came to our house and you saw what we ate a ton of sugar, okay? We eat a ton of sugar. We eat a lot of fruit, a lot of dairy, raw dairy, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We eat those tubers, right? The potatoes, carrots, all those different types of vegetables, tubers, honey, so much honey in our house. We have cane sugar in our house. Yes, the white cane sugar, and real maple syrup. So we eat a lot of sugar. But this is what we're eating. Okay, now, where sugar is not the problem, where sugar is getting blamed, okay? So where sugar is not the problem but gets blamed, okay, is not sugar, okay? So even this picture here, you see sugar, and it's got all this stuff here, okay? And it shows this white powder stuff. I'll tell you that if you actually get these sweets, we'll just call them the category of sweets, there's rarely any of this in there. You're not going to find a lot of this in there, okay? When we pick up something, and I actually talked with Eve about this before I created this, I said, sweetie, what do you look for when you pick up something? She's like, oh, I just look for cane sugar. Okay, if it's got cane sugar in it, then I'll get it. It's not easy to find things that have real sugar in it. They have all kinds of other things. So what is the problem? If sugar is not the problem, what is the problem? Okay, because when you actually pick up these things, like these things that are pictured here, among a lot of other things that sugar is being blamed for, there is no cane sugar in this. There's no honey in it. What is in it though? Fake sugars. Okay, a lot of fake sugars, artificial sweeteners. That's what's in there. That's what's causing the problem. Is that we're putting things in there that taste sweet, but actually isn't sugar. And the amount of artificial sweeteners out there is off the charts. High fructose corn. I mean, it's crazy. But that's what's in there. What else is in there? Chemicals you can't even pronounce. I mean, I looked up the ingredients of a Krispy Kreme donut just for fun before I did this. I swear to you, I could pronounce maybe three of the ingredients. It was literally just chemicals and I don't even know what, right? And we're blaming sugar for chemicals? Like what? No, the problem is we're eating chemicals, right? What else? All kinds of oils, okay? And all of these things that we are calling bad for us, like sugar is bad, all these pastries or whatever else, you have this idea that sugar is bad. I promise you there's all kinds of oils in there. Vegetable oils, canola oil, safflower, all that cheap oil that we talked about previously. That's what's in there. That's what the problem is, not sugar. What else? Fake fats all over the place in these things. Carrageenan, gums, more chemicals, more things to make stuff taste fatty, right? To create the illusion of something fat, which gives it taste. Okay, but there's no fat in this, zero fat. But how does it taste fatty? How does it taste creamy? Okay, well, because there's fake fat in it, right? And flour. Flour is the other thing that lives in all this stuff that sugar is getting blamed for, All right. And so this is why I say sugar needs a better PR agent. Okay. And it's gotten so bad. Sugar's gotten blamed so bad that there's now people out there that are saying you shouldn't have fruit because it's got sugar in it. Oh, you shouldn't have dairy because don't have honey, it's got sugar in it. Oh, maple syrup, sugar. It's just like, oh yeah. We once again, we're hitting the bullseye on the wrong target. This is not the problem. This is the problem. Okay, so start to distinguish between the two. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about protein. All right, so let's talk about the roles of protein. And the list is extensive here. And I'm just going to start here with one thing that I notice with a lot of clients, and I would say it's more likely the case when I'm working with people that are trying to heal or recover from an injury or just try to get into better health or experience more vitality. My experience is that most people are not getting enough good quality protein. And I would even say that a lot of people are relating to certain foods as good protein sources. And some of the biggest ones that I would say people relate to as good protein sources are nuts, seeds, and beans. We're going to talk about this obviously in the book. I get into this quite a bit. And obviously this is just a summary of that. But I just wanted to say that I would invite you not to relate to any of those types of foods as protein because of a lot of what you read in the book and what we're going to cover here. So there's so much that proteins do. They are essential to exuding vitality. And I'm going to go through a few of the roles. And every one of these things I list, you could list 100 more things that directly impact other things. I mean, so protein is so important, and getting enough of the right kinds of protein could be the difference between you being healthy, number one, and then there's no way you're going to get into a state of vitality without quality protein, right? So let's go through some of the roles just so you can understand how important it is. Number one, growth and maintenance. So I talk about this in this chapter quite a bit, but there is no repairing anything without protein. It's essential for repair. It's the building blocks for literally every tissue in your cell in your body. Okay, so if you're trying to repair yourself, you have to make sure you're getting the proper amount of protein. If you work out and you're not getting enough protein to rebuild and repair the muscle, you're going to have a recovery problem. I mean, the list goes on and on. So growth and maintenance, essential for repair. Proteins also directly influence many biochemical reactions. And they do that because enzymes are proteins that are responsible for thousands of things like digestion, energy production, blood clotting, muscle contraction. I mean, again, this list could be hundreds of things, okay? So instead of writing 1,000 things, I just wrote thousands of things, but some of the key things. So digestive issues is a major thing right now. So many people have digestive problems. Energy production, so many people are suffering from low energy, blood clotting, muscle contraction. There's just an endless number of things that our body depends on protein for. Okay, so enzymes play such a big role in so many different things, and proteins basically make up enzymes. All right, so important for so many of the chemical reactions. It also acts as a messenger. Proteins and peptide hormones specifically, like insulin, HGH, ADH, ACTH, they are all directly influencing and responsible for things like water and salt. ADH is a hormone that helps regulate water and salt and supports the kidneys. ACTH plays a role in cortisol, the role of cortisol, and what cortisol does. Cortisol is a stress hormone that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think sometimes we say cortisol is a stress hormone. It's bad. It's far from bad. This is why we go into this in later chapters. That stress isn't a bad thing. And cortisol plays an essential role in so many critical functions in the body. HGH is growth hormone, insulin, blood sugar regulation. I mean, if you don't have protein, all of these things are impacted. It provides structure, like I said, cells and tissues, like literal structure of the body. The cells and the tissues, they don't exist without protein. They certainly can't regenerate and repair without protein. It bolsters immune health because of their role in immunoglobulins and antibodies. So if you feel like you're not resilient when it comes to sicknesses and stuff, well, getting adequate protein is really important to making sure your immune system has the raw materials to do all the roles that it does. It also transports and stores nutrients, okay? Transports vitamins and minerals, glucose and oxygen. So I just want to read this. Vitamins and minerals, glucose and oxygen. These are all literal. You can't live without these things. There are certain minerals and vitamins you can't live without. Glucose, forget it. If you don't get glucose to the cell efficiently, you're not living. And oxygen. So protein plays a role in all of these things. It is so important to make sure you're getting enough of the best types of protein. Okay, so what are the best types of protein? Best sources of protein. So here's how I'm defining best sources of protein. Again, just to echo what I said in the book. It provides the body with the full array of amino acids, which are basically the building blocks of protein, without harmful and or unhelpful metabolic substances, so without baggage attached. So yes, you could have some amino acids in certain foods, but then it comes with all this baggage. And when I say baggage, it's harmful and or unhelpful metabolic substance, which is what you read about in this chapter when it comes to beans, seeds, legumes, etc., which is why I would not relate to them as protein sources. Having a couple nuts here and there, fine, but don't look at it, oh, I had a handful of nuts, I had my protein today. I wouldn't recommend it, okay? And so where can we get the best source of protein? Animal products supply the best source of protein. I mean, humans have been eating animal products since the beginning of humans. And even some of the tribes that are eating berries and things like that, they are eating insects. You'd be very hard pressed to find any society that's vegetarian or vegan. And again, I know this is a very controversial thing, and that's why the alarms went off when I started to say we're going to talk about protein. But again, what I'm sharing with you, and you can do what you want with it, is what I have found for myself and thousands of people. The best source of protein are from animal products. Now, that being said, we've got to be very mindful of things when it comes to animal products, unfortunately, because of the way animals are treated and all the things I mentioned in the book about factory farming, etc. The quality of the animal product is critical. You got to know where it's coming from, okay? People are raising their own chickens. My brother has a farm out in Montana, and he raises his own. The animal products he consumes, he raises them, and they're treated properly, and they're fed things that they are, that they're designed to eat, right? So the quality of the animal product is critical. Most of the animal products out there that we can get readily at any restaurant and or supermarket, we're not talking about high quality stuff here. Most of the animal products that we consume in America come from factory farming, period, end of story, which is why I don't disagree with people that you shouldn't eat that, okay? But that doesn't mean that animal products, when raised properly, when it's done right, isn't the best source of protein. On that note, you should always inquire about where the animal product came from. I gave you guys some resources in the book, eatwild.com, westinaprice.com. There are great resources out there where you can find properly farmed, raised animals that are held as sacred. There's gratitude for the animal in the process in which, everything in nature is recycled, right? Animals eat other animals. Is the way that nature was designed, right? So always inquire about your animal products came from. Eating the whole animal is always best. That's the other thing. I mentioned a an episode of the Chef's Table in the book, and I really recommend everybody watch it. It's really heartwarming and it's so really neat about this young boy who was raised as the son of a butcher and wanted to become a veterinarian and he wanted to be a vegetarian and so on and so forth. Long story short, it's this little Italian family. He had to now take over his father's business because his father got sick, and just the process that this gentleman takes and how sacred he holds the animals and how he doesn't waste one part of the animal. He eats the whole animal, and you go to his restaurant or his store in Italy and you just sit down and he just feeds you basically all kinds of deliciousness, but it's not just filet mignon, right? So eating the whole animal is always best. I would say that the things that we consume in our house on a fairly regular basis is liver, kidney, and heart. Those are relatively easy to get ground up. You can even get ground beef that has liver, kidney, and heart in it. But again, getting the whole animal, you're getting so many of the minerals and nutrients and different amino acid profiles that are all different depending on the muscle meat. All right, so eating the whole animal is always best. And then this is the other big part of what I share in this chapter is understanding the difference between muscle meats and homemade broths. So it's important to understand that 50% of the protein that comes from an animal comes from its connective tissue, bones especially, cartilage, etc. That protein that comes from bones, etc., that protein, those amino acids I refer to as liquid gold because that protein is designed for repair and recovery. There's a reason why traditionally when you're sick, mom or grandma makes you chicken soup from the carcass of the animal. That soup, gelatin, right? If you really make good homemade chicken soup, when you put it in the fridge and when you take it out, you'll notice that the whole thing is gelatinous. It's like a big thing of Jello. Okay, that means there's a ton of protein in there. So gelatin is protein, and it's the kind of protein that is designed for repair and recovery. There's a reason why traditionally when people are sick, they get chicken soup. Okay, it's because of the broth has all these healing amino acids in it. And so I kind of created this little breakdown here, which is actually not in the book, but average protein for anyone, I would say adult. So remember in the book, the further you are away from puberty, the less muscle meats you need because the muscle meats are more for growth and development, right? But once you hit puberty, actually the aging process begins. And so as the further we get away from puberty, the less development and growth. We don't need the amino acids as much for that, okay? If you're trying to put on muscle, gain muscle mass, sure, having some of that type of protein is important. But in general, average protein breakdown for an adult, you'll see about 35% from broth and gelatin, 30% from dairy, 20% eggs and OJ, and then meats, 15%. You'll notice OJ there. And yes, Ray talks about orange juice being actually a pretty decent source of some amino acids, freshly squeezed orange juice. So this is just your average protein breakdown for an adult. If you're somebody who needs a lot of accelerated repair, I know I went heavy on the broth and gelatin when I started learning about this because I had my elbow problem, I had the nerve damage in my hand. There was a lot of things that I was trying to recover from, and I would take an entire thermos. So basically, I'd probably say 2 quarts of broth that I would have every day to help balance out and get those good amino acids in. So now one thing about this is there is can be a histamine response with broth and gelatin. So you just got to be mindful if you're sensitive. And again, anytime you make changes, always go slowly. But I just wanted to kind of share here just kind of the breakdown of protein. And you'll see that most adults, most of the most of the protein they get are probably from meats, maybe some eggs, but most people, what they count as protein are nuts, seeds, maybe some cheese, right? Um, but this is what we're aiming for. And again, this is just to give you an idea. None of this is written in stone. This is just from our clinical experience. All right. So protein super important. And remember, you really want to start with protein when we did that macronutrient breakdown, and then a little less fat, more carbs from a gram standpoint. But protein's kind of that where you start, making sure you get enough protein. I would say the average female, about 80 grams. Average male could be anywhere from 120 to 150, depending. Right, but that's a decent amount of protein that most people that we work with are not getting enough protein. All right, so let's touch base on fats. By far the best fats are going to be the most saturated fats: butter, dairy, coconut oil, palm kernel, or beef fat from 100% grass-fed animals. That's going to be your best fat. Now, just understand that just because we're saying most saturated, that doesn't mean that there's not unsaturated fats here, mono and poly. Okay, when you're getting, especially from animals, you're getting all the omegas, the 6s, the 9s, like you're getting all that stuff in here. Okay, so it's not that what we're saying is omega-3, 6, 9s, and polyunsaturates are all bad. It's the volume in which we're eating them, and we're eating fats that are mostly polyunsaturates, and that's where it can be dangerous. You're going to get it in there if you really eat this kind of diet. You're going to get all the omega-3s. You're not going to need to supplement with fish oils and all this other stuff. And understand that a lot of and I didn't put this in the book, but a lot of the benefits that people are seeing from high fish oils is actually a suppression of the immune system. And so you see inflammation drop. And this is what Ray wrote about in his fish oil experiment. He correlated high amounts of fish oils by getting x-rays. And at a point in time, x-rays were used to decrease inflammation. And then they found out, oh my God, it's actually really toxic to be doing x-rays over and over again. Well, he basically says fish oils are basically the same. It's an example, the same type of thing. Yes, there's a decrease in inflammation, but it can be very toxic long term. Okay, so the best sources of fat are going to be here. You've got the monounsaturated fats, which again are can be beneficial, but we use these more in our house as supplements, complements to meals. So olive, cashew, macadamia, avocado, and then chicken and pork fat from properly raised animals, and that's the big catch here. Chicken and pork, if it's the properly raised, properly fed, then yes, you're getting some good, decent sources of fat here. But most chicken and pork, chicken and pig are not raised properly, so it's mostly unsaturated polyunsaturates because these animals can't convert the unsaturated to saturated like cows, bison, and those types of animals. True herbivores, really. True herbivores have the ability to convert unsaturated to saturated. Omnivores, they can't, right? Like humans, okay? And that just brings me to the list of the most dangerous polyunsaturated fats. And honestly, the way that we do it in our house is if we see any of these things listed in any ingredients, we put it back. I mean, and it's kind of crazy. We actually do this with our dog food too. And that's probably the biggest challenge, is to find dog food that doesn't have this stuff in it. So all of these oils, we would invite you to try to stay away from. I would say that one of the biggest benefits that we've seen people, the biggest benefit we've seen people have is when they eliminate all foods that have high polyunsaturated fats in it, because it really eliminates a lot of the food supply. But here's your list. Why are polyunsaturated PUFAs dangerous? It's because they're unstable. Like I mentioned in the book, they have many double bonds, which makes oxygen more likely to bond with it, which changes the molecule and becomes rancid. This is why trans fats were created, because these molecules were so unstable. The trans fat is basically the artificial stabilization of these fats, right? So I think it's pretty universally accepted that trans fats are bad for us. But they're trying to chemically alter polyunsaturates to make them more stable instead of just eating the stable fats. Like, wow, wouldn't that make more sense? Oh, yeah, whatever, Can't mass produce. This is much easier to mass produce than properly raised animals, dairy and butter, right? So that basically wraps up chapter 5. In chapter 6, we go over the vitality foods, the vitality food pyramid, and we get into what are the best types of carbs, protein, and fats very specifically. So I'll see you in chapter 6.